It was one of those gray afternoons in the city, when the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or just hang heavy with clouds. The air smelled like wet pavement and old exhaust. People hurried past each other, eyes down, headphones in, lost in their own worlds. Nobody looked twice at the man sitting under the bus stop awning near the edge of Jefferson Park. He wore a faded army jacket 2 sizes too big. His boots cracked at the heel and a thin blanket wrapped around his shoulders like armor against the damp chill. He hadn't always lived like this. 10 years ago he'd had a small garage downtown, fixed engines, replaced brakes, knew every rattle a car could make. Folks called him the Miracle Man, because he could bring a dead engine back to life with just a wrench and some patience. But then the shop closed. Insurance wouldn't cover the fire. His wife got sick. The medical bills stacked up like bricks, and one by one the walls of his life crumbled. She passed quietly in her sleep one winter night, and after that, the world felt too loud and too empty at the same time. He drifted, slept in shelters when he could, under bridges when he couldn't, learned to move like a shadow so people wouldn't flinch when he passed by. That afternoon he wasn't thinking about any of that. He was just trying to stay dry and quiet, sipping from a paper cup someone had left on the bench, half full of cold coffee but still warm enough to hold in his hands. That's when he heard it, a sharp, scared voice cutting through the hum of traffic. Around the corner of the school fence, 3 boys, maybe 13 or 14, had cornered a smaller kid against the brick wall. They weren't shouting. That was the worst part. They were calm, smirking, taking their time. One of them kept flicking the boy's ear while saying, "Go on, say it. Say it like you mean it." The little boy, couldn't have been more than 8, was trembling, his backpack slipping off one shoulder, eyes wide and wet but refusing to cry. The man under the awning watched for a long moment. He'd learned not to get involved. Getting involved meant trouble. Trouble meant cops. Cops meant questions he didn't have answers for. But something about the way the boy stood there, chin up even though his knees were shaking, reminded him of himself at that age. Scared, but trying so hard not to show it. He stood up slowly, joints stiff from sitting too long. He didn't march over. He just walked steady and calm like he belonged there. When he got close enough, he cleared his throat. Deep and low, the kind of sound that makes people turn. The 3 boys spun around, startled. One of them laughed nervous-like. "Yo, man, this ain't your business." The man didn't raise his voice. He just looked at them, not angry, not threatening, just tired. "You ever been scared like that?" he asked, nodding toward the little boy. "Really scared? Like your heart's trying to punch its way out your chest?" They didn't answer. "Didn't think so," he said softly. "Because if you had, you wouldn't be doing this." He stepped between them and the boy, not blocking, just standing there like a tree, rooted, quiet, impossible to ignore. The boys exchanged glances. One muttered something under his breath, but they backed off. Not because they were afraid of him, maybe, but because his presence made them feel small in a way they didn't like. They shuffled away, kicking stones, pretending they hadn't just been called out by a man who owned nothing but still had dignity. The little boy stayed frozen for a second, then let out a shaky breath. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "You okay?" the man asked gently. The boy nodded fast, then wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. "Yeah," he whispered. "Thanks. No need to thank me," the man said. "Just go home safe." But the boy didn't move right away. He looked up, really looked at the man. Not with pity, not with fear, but with something like wonder. "You're not like other grown-ups," he said. The man almost smiled. Maybe not. The rain started then, soft at first, then heavier. The boy pulled his hood up and turned to leave, but paused. "My name's Eli," he called over his shoulder. The man watched him run down the street, small and quick, disappearing around the corner like a sparrow taking flight. He sat back down under the awning, the coffee gone cold in his hands. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He didn't know it yet. But that moment, the quiet stand against cruelty, the simple act of seeing someone when no one else would, was about to change everything because Eli wasn't just any kid. And the man under the awning wasn't just passing through. Their paths had crossed for a reason, and the next time they met, it wouldn't be by accident. Eli came back 2 days later. Not with fanfare, not with speeches, just a brown paper bag tucked under his arm and a nervous shuffle in his step. He found the man sitting on the same bench feeding crumbs to a pair of sparrows. "I brought you something," Eli said, holding out the bag. Inside was a peanut butter and banana sandwich, slightly squished, and a juice box. "Mom used to make these for me when I was sad," he said quietly. "She's not here anymore." The man looked at the sandwich, then at Eli's face. Open, honest, offering kindness like it cost nothing. His throat tightened. He hadn't been offered food without being asked for money in years. "Thank you," he said, taking it carefully like it was made of glass. Eli sat down beside him. Not too close, just enough to share the space. "The Bullies didn't come today," he said. "Maybe they're scared you'll be there again?" The man chewed slowly, the flavors sweet and familiar. "Maybe," he said. "But you don't need me to fight your battles, Eli. You just need to know you're worth standing up for." Eli was quiet for a while. Then he asked, "Do you have a name?" The man hesitated. Most people just called him "Hey you" or "Sir" or nothing at all. But this boy deserved better. "Yeah," he said. "Call me James." It wasn't his real name, but it was the name of the man who'd once saved him long ago. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to carry that name forward. From then on, Eli showed up almost every day after school. Sometimes with food. Sometimes with a drawing. A superhero with a big coat and kind eyes. Sometimes he just sat and talked about his day, his voice filling the silence like sunlight through cracks in a wall. James listened. Really listened. Not like adults who nod while checking their phones, but like every word mattered. He taught Eli how to whistle with a blade of grass, how to tell if a storm was coming by the way the birds flew, how to look someone in the eye without flinching. And Eli, in his quiet way, gave James something too. A reason to wake up. A reason to wash his face, to straighten his jacket, to believe that maybe he still had something to offer the world. One afternoon, as they watched the sunset paint the sky orange and purple, Eli asked, "Why do you stay out here? Don't you have a home?" James didn't answer right away. He looked at the city, the tall buildings, the bright windows, the lives moving behind glass. "Home isn't always a place," he said finally. "Sometimes it's a feeling. Like when someone sees you, really sees you." Eli thought about that. Then he leaned his head against James's shoulder just for a second. "I see you," he said. James closed his eyes. And for the first time in a long time, he felt seen too. What neither of them knew was that someone else had been watching, not with suspicion but with growing concern and curiosity. A man in a dark sedan had parked down the street a few times, just observing. He never approached, never interfered, but his eyes followed every interaction between the boy and the man on the bench. And soon, that man would step out of the shadows. Because Eli's father had finally noticed something was different about his son. He was smiling more, standing taller, talking about the man who knows everything. And when he found out who that man really was, well, that's when everything changed again. But for now, under the fading light of another city day, there was just a boy and a man, sharing silence like it was a gift, and sometimes that's enough to begin a new story. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet friendship between the man and the boy grew like ivy on an old brick wall, slow, steady, and strong. The man who'd asked to be called James still slept on benches or in the sheltered corner behind the community center, but his days now had a rhythm. Around 3 o'clock, he'd find a spot near the school gate, not too close, just close enough to see. And almost like clockwork, Eli would come running out, backpack bouncing, eyes scanning the street until they landed on him. A smile would break across the boy's face like sunrise, and he'd wave like he'd just found a lost treasure. At first, people noticed. A few parents gave James wary looks. One woman even pulled her child closer and hurried past, whispering something under her breath. But James didn't react. He stayed calm, kept his hands visible, never reached out unless Eli came to him first. He knew how the world saw him. A black man with rough clothes and tired eyes sitting alone near a school. He knew the suspicion that followed him like a shadow. So he let his actions speak louder than words, and Eli didn't care what anyone thought. To him, James wasn't the homeless guy. He was the man who taught him how to tie a proper knot. Not just for shoes, James had said, but for fishing, for climbing, for holding things together when they want to fall apart. He was the one who showed him how to listen to the wind and tell which way it was blowing, how to spot a robin's nest hidden in the oak tree by the park, how to count change without a calculator. Small things, maybe. But to Eli, they felt like secrets from a wise old wizard. One rainy Tuesday, Eli showed up with a plastic grocery bag tied around his shoes. His socks were soaked and he was shivering. Dad's working late again, he said, trying to sound casual, but his voice cracked a little. James didn't ask questions. He just unwrapped his own dry blanket, the one he saved for nights when the cold bit deep, and wrapped it around Eli's shoulders. Sit, he said, patting the bench. Rain's not going anywhere. Might as well make peace with it. They sat in silence for a while, watching raindrops race down the window of a closed bakery across the street. Then Eli spoke, so quiet James almost missed it. Sometimes I think, if Mom was here, things would be different. James didn't offer empty comfort like she's in a better place or everything happens for a reason. He'd heard those lines too many times after his own wife passed, and they never helped. Instead, he said, yeah, they probably would be, but you're still here, and that means you've got to be strong, not just for her but for you. Eli looked up. How do you stay strong when everything hurts? James thought for a long time. Rain tapped softly on the awning above them. You find one good thing, he said finally. Just one. Maybe it's a warm cup of soup. Maybe it's someone who says your name like they mean it. You hold on to that. And when the bad days come, and they will, you remember that good thing exists. That's how you keep going. Eli nodded slowly like he was storing those words somewhere safe inside him. Their time together wasn't always serious. Sometimes they played games. James taught Eli how to play checkers using bottle caps and chalk on the sidewalk. Eli taught James how to fold paper airplanes that actually flew. Once they spent an entire afternoon trying to guess the names of clouds. That one looks like a dragon. Eli shouted, pointing. Nah, James chuckled. That's a grumpy old turtle with a hat. People started to get used to seeing them. The bakery owner began leaving out a cup of hot chocolate on slow afternoons. The librarian waved when they passed by. Even the school crossing guard, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair, started saying afternoon gentlemen like they were just two regular folks sharing the day. But not everyone was comfortable with it. One afternoon, a police cruiser rolled slowly down the street and parked a few yards away. An officer stepped out, not in a rush, not aggressive, just observant. He leaned against his car, arms crossed, watching them from a distance. James felt his stomach tighten. He'd been stopped before, sometimes for loitering, sometimes for matching a description, once just because he was sitting too long on a public bench. He knew how fast kindness could be mistaken for something else, but the officer didn't approach. He just stood there watching. After a few minutes, he nodded slightly, almost like a greeting, and got back in his car. James exhaled, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. Later, Eli asked, "Why was that policeman looking at us?" "Because he's doing his job," James said carefully. "And because people like me, we make folks nervous even when we're not doing anything wrong." "Is that fair?" Eli asked, frowning. "No," James said, "but the world isn't always fair. What matters is that you know the truth, and that you treat people the way you'd want to be treated, no matter what they look like or where they sleep." Eli thought about that. Then he said, "I think you're the best person I know." James didn't know what to say to that, so he just ruffled the boy's hair and said, "Don't go telling people that. You'll ruin my reputation." But inside, something warm bloomed in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the big, flashy kind, but the quiet kind that grows in the cracks of broken places. Then came the day everything shifted. Eli didn't show up at the usual time. James waited until the streetlights flickered on, until the last stragglers left the schoolyard. His mind raced. Had something happened? Was the boy sick? Had his father found out about their friendship and put a stop to it? Just as James was about to walk toward the school office, something he dreaded doing, knowing how he'd be received, a car pulled up. Not flashy, not new, but clean and well kept. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, with tired eyes and a suit that looked like it had seen too many long days. He walked with purpose, but not anger. When he saw James, he paused. Not with fear, not with disgust, but with something like recognition. He walked over slowly, hands in his pockets, stopping a few feet away. "You're the one Eli's been talking about," he said. His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it, like a man carrying something heavy for a long time. James stood up, brushing off his jacket. "I don't mean any harm," he said quickly. "He comes to me. I never go near the school." I know," the man interrupted gently. "He told me. Said you helped him when some kids were pushing him around. James nodded, not sure what to say next. The man took a deep breath. I'm his father. Silence hung between them, thick and fragile. James braced himself for accusations, for demands to stay away, for the usual speech about protecting his son. But instead, the man said, he hasn't smiled this much since his mother passed. James looked at him, surprised. I've been working 2 jobs, the father continued, his voice cracking just a little, trying to keep a roof over his head, food on the table. I thought I was doing enough, but I didn't see how alone he was. Not really, until he started coming home talking about you. He looked James in the eye. Thank you. Those 2 words hit James like a punch to the chest, but a good one. Like someone had finally seen the real him, not the version the world assumed. I just listened, James said. Sometimes that's the rarest thing, the father replied. They stood there for a moment. 2 men from different worlds, bound by the same quiet love for a small boy who'd somehow brought them together. Then the father glanced at the sky, where stars were starting to peek through the city haze. It's getting cold, he said. You got somewhere warm to sleep tonight? James almost laughed. Warm's a luxury I haven't had in a while. The father didn't offer money, didn't offer a handout. Instead, he said, there's a shelter on Maple Street. They serve dinner at 6. Good people run it. Tell them David sent you, James nodded. I'll remember that. Before getting back in the car, the father turned. He asks about you every morning, he said softly. Worried you'll be gone. James looked down at his worn boots. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Not while he needs me. The father gave a small, tired smile. Good, because I think we both do. He drove off slowly, leaving James standing under the streetlight, the city humming around him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt seen, needed, human. And when Eli came running up the next day, eyes wide with worry, You're still here. James just smiled and said, Where else would I be? From then on, things changed, but not in a dramatic way. No sudden riches, no miracle fixes, just small shifts. The father started showing up sometimes, standing a little farther back, watching them talk or play checkers. He never interrupted, just observed. And slowly, trust grew, not just between James and Eli, but between James and the father, too. One Saturday morning, the father brought 2 paper cups of coffee and sat on the bench beside James while Eli played nearby. They didn't talk much at first, just sipped their coffee, watched the pigeons, listened to the distant sound of a saxophone playing on the corner. Finally, the father said, You ever work with cars? James looked at him, surprised. Used to own a garage, the father nodded. Mine's been making a noise, like a cough. Thought maybe, if you had time? James didn't say yes right away. Pride was a stubborn thing. But then he thought of Eli's smile, of the way the boy looked at him like he mattered, and he said, Yeah, I got time. That afternoon, under the shade of an old oak tree, James popped the hood of the father's car and showed Eli how to check the oil, how to listen for trouble in the engine. The father watched, arms crossed, but his eyes were soft, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. As the sun dipped low, painting everything gold, James wiped his hands on a rag and said, She'll run smooth now. The father handed him a $20 bill. James shook his head. Keep it, just let me keep seeing him. The father didn't argue. He just nodded. You're part of his life now, he said. That means you're part of mine too. No grand speeches, no promises of forever. Just 2 men choosing kindness over fear. And in that moment, something broken began to heal, not just for Eli, but for all of them, because sometimes the most powerful thing in the world isn't money or power or fame. It's someone who shows up, who listens. Who stays in James? He was staying. The days kept turning, and something quiet but real settled between the 3 of them, the man, the boy, and the boy's father. It wasn't a sudden change, not like in the movies where everything flips in one dramatic scene. It was slower, softer, like morning light creeping across a cold floor. The father started showing up more often, not every day, but enough that James began to expect him. Sometimes he'd bring coffee, sometimes just a nod. Sometimes he'd sit on the bench while Eli showed James a new drawing or practiced reading aloud from a library book. James never asked for anything. He didn't want to seem like he was taking advantage. But the father kept offering small things. A clean pair of socks, a sandwich wrapped in foil, a bottle of water on hot days. Not charity exactly, more like respect. Like he was saying, I see you. You matter. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, the father pulled up in his car and didn't just drop Eli off. He turned off the engine, stepped out, and walked over with a look James hadn't seen before, serious but not angry. Just thoughtful. Can we talk? He asked. James nodded. Sure. Eli looked between them, eyes wide. Do you need me to go? No, the father said gently. You can stay. This is about you too. They walked to a nearby diner, the kind with sticky tables and coffee that's been sitting too long, but warm and lit up like a safe harbor in the city's noise. The father held the door open and James hesitated just a second before stepping inside. He hadn't been in a place like this in years, not since before everything fell apart. People glanced at him, but no one said anything. Maybe it was because the father walked beside him like they belonged together, or maybe the world was finally learning to look past appearances. They sat in a booth by the window. Eli slid in next to James like he was anchoring himself to the only person who made him feel steady. A waitress came over, not smiling too wide, not looking away too fast, just normal. What can I get you? Coffee, the father said. Black. Hot chocolate, please, Eli said. James almost said nothing, out of habit. But then he remembered this wasn't pity. This was conversation. So he said, coffee. With a little milk if you got it. She nodded and left. For a moment, no one spoke. Outside cars passed, a bus rumbled by. A couple laughed under a street lamp. Then the father leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low. I need to understand something, he said, looking straight at James. Why you? Why did you step in that day? James didn't flinch. He'd asked himself the same question 100 times. Because someone had to, he said simply. And no one else did. The father nodded slowly. I should have been there. You're working, James said, trying to keep things together. I get that. I know, the father said, rubbing his temples. But I miss so much. The way he stopped talking at dinner. The way he'd flinch when the phone rang. I thought he was just sad. I didn't realize he was scared. Eli looked down at his hands. I didn't want to worry you, he whispered. The father reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. You never have to carry that alone, okay? James watched them, heart tight in his chest. He remembered his own father, how he'd worked 3 jobs and still came home too tired to talk. How he'd loved hard but showed it in silence. Love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just showing up, even when you're exhausted. Then the father turned back to James. I've been asking around, he said carefully. Not in a bad way, just, I wanted to know who you were. The school crossing guard said you've never once gone past the gate. The librarian said you always return the books Eli borrows. The bakery owner said you once gave your last dollar to a stray dog. James shifted in his seat. People talk too much. No, the father said. People notice when someone does the right thing without expecting anything back. He paused, took a breath. My wife, she passed 2 years ago, cancer, fast and cruel. After that, I buried myself in work. Thought if I kept moving, I wouldn't feel the hole she left. But I left another hole right next to Eli. James didn't say anything. Some truths don't need words. I didn't know how to be both father and mother, the father went on, voice rough. So I just tried to be provider. But kids don't just need food and a roof. They need someone to see them. Really see them. He looked at James. You saw him. James swallowed. He's a good kid. Brave even when he's scared. Smart. Kind. He reminds me of someone I used to know. Who? Eli asked, curious. James almost didn't say it. But something in the quiet of that diner, in the honesty of the moment, made him speak. Myself, a long time ago. The coffee arrived. Steam curled into the air. Eli stirred his hot chocolate with a tiny spoon, watching the marshmallows melt. Then the father did something unexpected. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a faded photograph. It was old, edges worn soft, colors faded by time. He slid it across the table. James picked it up. It showed a younger version of the father, maybe in his 20s, standing beside an older man with kind eyes and a strong jaw. They were in front of a courthouse holding signs. The older man had his arm around the younger one's shoulders like he was proud of him. That's my father, the father said quietly. He was an activist, fought for voting rights, fair housing, justice for folks who didn't have a voice. In '83, he was arrested during a peaceful march. They said he threw a rock. He didn't, but they needed someone to blame. He got 2 years. James stared at the photo. His hands started to tremble. His name was Robert, the father continued. He spent most of that time in a state prison down south. Said the only thing that kept him going was a friend he met in there. Someone who taught him how to read legal papers, who shared his bread, who reminded him he wasn't alone. James's breath caught in his throat. He looked up, eyes wide. Robert, from Birmingham? The father froze. You knew him? James couldn't speak for a second. The memory rushed back like a wave. The cold cell, the smell of bleach and sweat, the sound of rain on the roof. 2 cots, 1 window, and a man who refused to let bitterness win. I was in that cell with him, James whispered, for 8 months. Before they moved me, the father's face went pale. No, it can't be. It is, James said, voice thick. He called me son even though I wasn't. Said every young man needed someone to believe in him. Taught me how to write a letter that mattered. How to stand tall even when you're locked up. He looked at the photo again. He talked about you. Said he had a boy. Said he hoped you'd grow up in a better world. The father's eyes filled with tears. He didn't wipe them away. He died last year, he said softly. Never got to meet Eli, but he told me stories. About a man in prison who gave him hope when he had none. They sat in silence for a long time. Eli looked between them, confused but sensing something big had just happened. Then the father reached across the table and put his hand over James's. Not shaking, not dramatic, just solid, real. All this time, he said, voice breaking, I thought I was thanking a stranger for helping my son. But you're not a stranger. You're family. James didn't know what to say. He'd spent years feeling like the world had forgotten him. Like he was just a ghost walking through streets that didn't care. But here, in this greasy diner with weak coffee and flickering lights, he was seen, remembered, connected. Eli tugged at his sleeve. Does this mean you're like my grandpa's friend? James managed a small smile. Something like that. The father leaned back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. My father used to say, the people who show up when no one else will, they're the ones who change your life. I never understood it until now. Outside, the city kept moving. But inside that booth, time slowed. 3 lives, broken in different ways, had found each other not by accident, but by something deeper. Maybe grace, maybe fate, maybe just the quiet courage to be kind when it's easier not to be. Before they left, the father didn't offer money, didn't make promises. He just said, come by the house tomorrow. Eli's got a science project, needs someone who knows how things work. James almost said no. Old habits die hard. Pride, shame, fear. They all whispered in his ear, you don't belong there. You'll mess it up. But then he looked at Eli, who was staring at him with wide, hopeful eyes, and he said, yeah, I'll be there. The next day, James washed his face with cold water from a public restroom sink. He brushed his jacket with his hands, combed his hair back with wet fingers, and walked to the address the father had given him, a small house on a quiet street, with a porch light on and a bike leaning against the steps. The father opened the door before he even knocked. Right on time, he said, stepping aside. Inside, the house smelled like soup and old books. There were photos on the walls, Eli as a baby, the father and his wife smiling on a beach, Robert holding a protest sign with fire in his eyes. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of love. Eli ran over, holding a shoebox full of wires and batteries. We're building a volcano, he announced. It's supposed to smoke. James laughed, a real laugh, the kind that starts deep in your chest. Well, let's not burn the house down. For hours they worked together. James showed Eli how to mix baking soda and vinegar for the best eruption. The father chopped vegetables for dinner in the kitchen, humming under his breath. No one treated James like a guest. They treated him like he belonged, and for the first time in a very long time he did. Later, as the sun set and the fake volcano bubbled over dramatically, covering the kitchen table in white foam, the father handed James a plate of food, real food, hot and steaming. You don't have to sleep on the street tonight, he said quietly, not looking at him like he was giving James space to say no. There's a couch, clean sheets, a lock on the door if you want it. James looked around at Eli grinning with foam on his nose, at the warm light, at the man who'd just offered him shelter not out of pity, but because his father's friend deserved a place to rest. He nodded. Thank you. That night, lying on the couch with a blanket tucked around him, James listened to the quiet sounds of the house, the hum of the fridge, the distant whistle of a train, Eli's soft breathing from the next room. He thought of Robert, gone but not forgotten. He thought of his own wife, who'd always believed in second chances. And he thought of the boy who'd seen him when no one else would. He closed his eyes, not with fear but with peace, because sometimes the people who save us aren't heroes in capes. They're just kids with sandwiches, fathers with open doors, and old friends we thought we'd lost, and sometimes the longest journey home begins with one small act of kindness. Morning light slipped through the curtains like a quiet promise. James woke slowly, not to the sound of traffic or the chill of concrete beneath him, but to the soft hum of a house breathing, pipes creaking, a clock ticking, the distant clink of a spoon against a bowl. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then it came back. The couch, the clean blanket, the smell of toast drifting from the kitchen. He sat up carefully, half expecting someone to tell him it was time to go. That last night was a mistake. That kindness had an expiration date, but no one came. Instead, Eli padded into the living room in mismatched socks, holding a glass of orange juice. "You're still here," he said, like it was the best news he'd heard all week. "Yeah," James said, rubbing his eyes. "Still here. Dad's making pancakes," Eli announced, handing him the juice. "He burns them sometimes, but he tries really hard." James took the glass, surprised by the weight of it. Real glass, not a paper cup. "Thanks, little man." Eli beamed and ran back to the kitchen, calling, "He's awake." The day unfolded gently. No rush, no pressure. James helped Eli finish his science project display board, writing neat labels in block letters while Eli drew a cartoon volcano with angry eyebrows. The father washed dishes, made phone calls about work, checked in every so often with a quiet, "You good?" Not pushing, just present. By afternoon, James felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just the warmth of a roof or the taste of real food. It was the feeling of being trusted, of belonging, even just a little. But he knew he couldn't stay forever on a couch. Pride wasn't the only reason. He didn't want to overstay, didn't want Eli or his father to feel burdened. So as the sun began to dip, he pulled the father aside near the back porch. "I should get back to the shelter," he said. "You've done more than enough." The father didn't argue. He just leaned against the railing, hands in his pockets, looking out at the small backyard where a rusted swing set stood. "You ever think about getting back on your feet?" "For real?" James sighed. "Every day. But it's not that simple. No ID, no address, no recent work history. Places don't hire you when you smell like the street." "I know," the father said. "But what if someone vouched for you? What if you had a place to start?" James looked at him. "You offering me a job?" "Not exactly," the father said. "But I know a guy who runs a garage downtown. Small place. Honest work. He trusts me. If I tell him you're good with engines, he'll give you a shot, even just sweeping floors at first." James's heart beat faster. "A chance, not a handout, a chance, but I'd need clothes," he said. "Something clean. And maybe a shower that doesn't cost a quarter." The father smiled faintly. "We've got both." That night, after Eli was in bed, the father brought out an old duffel bag. "My dad's old work clothes," he said. "They might fit." He was about your size. James opened it. Inside were sturdy jeans, a flannel shirt, a pair of steel-toed boots, worn but cared for. He ran his fingers over the fabric. These weren't just clothes. They were a bridge, from who he'd been to who he could be again. The next morning, James took the longest shower of his life. Hot water, real soap, no one rushing him. When he came out dressed in Robert's clothes, he almost didn't recognize himself in the mirror. Not because he looked different, his face was still lined with years of hardship, but because his eyes looked lighter, like a weight had lifted. At the garage, the owner, a gruff man with oil-stained hands and a no-nonsense stare, took one look at James, then at the father, and grunted. "You say he knows engines?" "He rebuilt my whole transmission last week using parts from a junkyard," the father said. The owner raised an eyebrow. "All right, sweep the bay. Change the oil on the blue sedan. We'll see." James didn't say a word. He just picked up a broom and got to work. By lunchtime, he'd not only changed the oil, he'd spotted a worn timing belt on another car and quietly pointed it out. The owner watched him for a while, then tossed him a wrench. "Fix it," and James did. Word spread fast in that part of town. Within a week, he was working full days, diagnosing problems, replacing parts, teaching the younger mechanics tricks he'd learned over decades. He wasn't paid much at first, but it was honest money. And every Friday he handed part of it to the father, not as rent, but as thanks. "No need," the father always said. "But I want to," James insisted. "I'm not a guest, I'm part of this." And slowly he was. He started sleeping in the spare room, not the couch. Eli left drawings on his pillow. The father left the porch light on, no matter how late James worked. On Sundays, they ate dinner together, sometimes takeout, sometimes something the father tried and mostly failed to cook. They talked about Robert, about the old days, about what kind of world they wanted Eli to grow up in. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies blink in the dusk, Eli asked, "Do you think Mom can see us?" The father put his arm around him. "I hope so." James looked up at the stars. "If she can," he said softly. "She's smiling." But not everything was easy. One afternoon, James went to the DMV to replace his lost ID. He had the birth certificate the father helped him order, a letter from the garage confirming his job, even a utility bill with the house address. But the clerk looked at his worn shoes, his calloused hands, and asked, "You sure you live at this address?" James kept his voice calm. "Yes, ma'am." She sighed like he was wasting her time. "We'll need more proof." He walked out feeling small again, the old shame creeping back in. That night he didn't mention it at dinner. But the father noticed. He always did. Later, after Eli was asleep, he found James sitting on the back steps, staring at the sky. "They didn't believe me," James said before the father could ask. "I figured," the father replied, sitting beside him. "But you know what? You don't need their stamp to be real. You're real to us." James nodded, but the hurt lingered. The next day, the father showed up at the garage with a man in a suit. Not flashy, just neat, with kind eyes and a calm presence. "This is Mr. Ellis," he said. "He used to work with my dad. Now he helps people get back on their feet. Paperwork, housing, all of it." Mr. Ellis shook James's hand. "Robert spoke highly of you," he said. "Said you had the mind of a lawyer and the heart of a healer." James blinked, surprised. "He said that?" He did. With Mr. Ellis's help, the ID came through. Then a social security card. Then a bank account. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of himself he'd thought was lost forever. But the biggest moment came on a rainy Thursday. James was under a pickup truck, tightening a bolt when the garage owner crouched beside him. "You ever think about getting your own shop again?" James paused. "Dreams don't pay bills. This one might," the owner said. "There's a space 2 blocks over. Landlord's a friend of mine. Rent's cheap. You could start small, just you and a toolbox." James sat back on his heels, wiping grease from his brow. "I'd need help. I'll lend you tools," the owner said, "and send customers your way." That night, James told Eli and his father over dinner. Eli's eyes lit up. "You're gonna have your own garage again?" "Maybe," James said, smiling. The father didn't say much. But later, when James was washing dishes, he handed him an envelope. Inside was a check, not huge, but enough for first month's rent and a used toolbox. "I believe in you," the father said simply. James couldn't speak. He just nodded, throat tight. The next week, they cleaned out the small garage space together, sweeping decades of dust, patching the roof, painting the walls a deep blue. Eli painted a sign, "James's Fix-It." It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. On opening day, only a few cars came, but James treated each one like it was the most important in the world. He checked fluids, listened to engines, gave honest advice, even if it meant telling someone they didn't need a repair. People noticed. Within a month, the waiting list grew. Not because he was the cheapest, but because he was fair. Because he remembered names. Because he'd sometimes let a single mom pay in installments or fix a student's car for free if they were heading to a job interview. And every evening, he walked back to the house not because he had to, but because he wanted to. One night, as they sat around the kitchen table playing cards, Eli asked, "Are you going to stay forever?" James looked at the father, then at Eli. "As long as you'll have me." The father smiled. "That's forever then. But life, even when it's good, has its storms." One afternoon, James got a call from the shelter he used to stay at. An old friend, another man who'd been on the streets, was sick. No family, no place to go. James didn't hesitate. He picked him up, brought him to a clinic, stayed with him through the night. When he got home at dawn, exhausted, the father was waiting on the porch. "You didn't have to do that," the father said. "Yes, I did," James replied, "because someone once did it for me." The father nodded. "Then bring him here. There's room." And just like that, the circle widened. Because kindness isn't a one-time thing. It's a ripple. It spreads. James's garage became more than a place to fix cars. It became a place where people felt seen, where a teenager with a broken-down bike could get help, where an elderly woman could wait safely while her car was serviced, where no one was turned away just because they couldn't pay today. And at the heart of it all was a boy who'd once been scared and alone, and the man who chose to stand beside him. Now, they stood together, not as savior and saved, but as family. And in a world that often feels cold and loud, that was everything. Years passed, not in a rush, but in the quiet way time moves when life finally feels steady. The little garage on Elm Street became a landmark in the neighborhood. People didn't just come for oil changes or brake repairs. They came because James listened, because he remembered that Mrs. Langley's grandson was graduating next week, or that Mr. Diaz's truck needed extra care before his long drive to see his daughter. His shop wasn't fancy. No neon signs, no glossy ads, but it had heart. And in a world that often felt too fast and too cold, that meant everything. Inside the small house on Sycamore Lane, life settled into a rhythm that felt like home. Eli grew taller, his voice deeper, his laugh louder. He still left drawings on James's pillow, though now they were sketches of engines, blueprints for go-karts, or comic strips where Grandpa James fought villains with a wrench and a kind word. He never called him Grandpa out loud, not exactly. But the way he said James now, warm, certain, full of trust, carried the same weight. The father aged too, but softer now. The lines around his eyes came from smiling more than worrying. He still worked hard, but he came home earlier, sat at the dinner table longer, asked Eli about his day like he really wanted to hear the answer. And every Sunday, without fail, the three of them went to the old cemetery on the edge of town. They'd stand by two graves, Eli's mother and Robert, and talk like they were still part of the conversation. Sometimes they'd bring flowers, sometimes just silence, but they always left feeling a little more whole. James never forgot where he'd come from. On cold nights, he'd leave extra blankets near the shelter. If a young person showed up at his garage looking lost, he'd offer them a sandwich and a chance to sweep floors for a few dollars. He knew what it was like to be invisible. And now that he wasn't, he made sure others didn't have to be either. Then came the spring of Eli's high school graduation. The whole neighborhood seemed to buzz with it. Flyers went up at the library, the bakery even taped to the lamppost outside James's shop. "Congratulations, Eli," they read with a photo of him in his cap and gown, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. James had saved for months to buy him a watch. Not expensive, but real. Silver band, simple face. On the back, he'd had it engraved, "Stand tall. You matter." The night before the ceremony, Eli found him in the garage polishing the same old toolbox he'd started with years ago. "You nervous?" Eli asked, leaning against the workbench. "Me," James chuckled. "I'm not the one walking across that stage. But you're coming, right?" "Wouldn't miss it." Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, if you hadn't stepped in that day, I don't know who I'd be." James stopped polishing, looked at him. "You'd still be you, just maybe a little more alone." "I was alone," Eli said softly, "until you saw me." James set the rag down, walked over and put a hand on the boy's shoulder, now almost as broad as his own. "And I'll keep seeing you, always." The next morning, James put on the best clothes he owned, a clean button-down shirt, dark slacks, and the shoes the father had given him years ago, now polished to a shine. He looked in the mirror and didn't see the man who once slept under bridges. He saw someone who'd been given a second chance and who'd used it well. At the school auditorium, the place was packed. Parents, teachers, friends, all buzzing with pride. James sat beside the father in the third row, hands folded in his lap, heart pounding like he was the one graduating. When Eli's name was called, he walked across the stage with his head high, just like James had taught him, and when he turned to face the crowd, his eyes went straight to them. He smiled. Not a big showy grin, but a quiet, sure smile that said, "I made it." And you were with me the whole way. After the ceremony, people hugged, cried, took photos. Someone handed James a program. He held it gently, like it was sacred. Later, as they stood outside under a sky full of late afternoon sun, the father turned to James. "He asked me something last night," he said. "Do you think James will be there?" Like it wasn't just about today, like it was about always. James looked at Eli, who was laughing with a friend, cap tilted sideways, still holding his diploma like it was treasure. "I'll be there," James said, "as long as he needs me." "He'll always need you," the father replied. "Just like I do." They didn't say much after that. They didn't need to. The years had spoken for them, in shared meals, late-night talks, oil-stained hands fixing more than just cars. A few weeks later, James got a letter. Not an email, not a text, a real letter handwritten on thick paper. It was from the city. They were giving him a small community award for service, integrity, and quiet courage. He almost threw it away. Awards weren't for people like him, he thought, but Eli found it in the trash. "You have to go," he insisted. "Everyone needs to know what you did." "I didn't do anything special," James said. "Yes, you did," Eli said, eyes serious. "You chose to care when it would have been easier not to. That's the most special thing there is." So James went. At the ceremony, held in the old town hall, the mayor spoke about unsung heroes. When James's name was called, the room stood, not just out of politeness, but because they knew. The bakery owner clapped the hardest. The librarian wiped her eyes. Even the crossing guard gave a firm nod. But the proudest faces were in the front row, Eli and his father, beaming like they'd won something too. Afterward, a reporter asked James, "What's the secret to turning your life around?" James thought for a moment. Then he said, "It's not about turning your life around. It's about someone believing you're worth turning toward." The quote made the local paper, but James didn't care about that. What mattered was that night back at the house, Eli made spaghetti, burnt a little but with love, and they ate on the porch, watching fireflies blink in the warm summer air. Life wasn't perfect. There were still bills, bad days, moments when the past whispered doubts in James's ear. But now he had people who whispered back, "You're here. You belong," and that was enough. Years later, long after Eli had gone to college, come back to teach at the local school, and started his own family, the garage still stood. A little older, a little more worn, but still open. James's hair had gone gray, his steps a little slower, but his hand still knew every bolt, every wire, every heartbeat of an engine. And every afternoon, just like before, a small child, Eli's daughter, would come running down the street, backpack bouncing, eyes bright. "Grandpa James," she'd call, climbing onto the stool beside him. "Can you show me how to fix the bike again?" And he would, patiently, lovingly, passing on not just skills but kindness. Because that's how it works, one act of courage. One moment of seeing someone when no one else would. That's how broken things get mended. Not with fanfare, not with miracles, but with steady, quiet love. And in the end, that's all any of us really need. To be seen. To be believed in. To know that no matter how far we fall, someone will be there to help us stand again. James never set out to be a hero. He just chose to be human. And sometimes that's the bravest thing of all.